On this vote, the yeas are 39, the nays are 60. Under the previous order requiring 60 votes for the adoption of this amendment, the amendment is not agreed to.
Madam President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent that the vote on the Cruz Mansion Amendment number 926 be at a time to be determined by the majority leader following consultation with the Republican leader on Thursday, July 20th, with all provisions of the previous order remaining in effect.
Is there an objection? Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to executive session to consider the following nominations en bloc. Calendar numbers 46 through number 52, number 82 through 107, number 110 through number 113, number 130 through 139, number 180 through number 205, number 224 through number 226, number 228 through number 234, number 236 through number 246, number 248 through number 249. That the nominations be confirmed en bloc, the motions be reconsidered be made, the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate, that no further motions be in order to any of the nominations, that the President be immediately notified of the Senate's action and the Senate then resume legislative session.
Is there an objection?
To object.
Senator from Kansas.
Madam President, I'm certainly honored to be here and stand beside my colleague and friend, Coach Tommy Tuberville, as we work through a very, very challenging situation regarding our military nominations. I've tried to listen to the arguments from my colleagues across the aisle. And one thing I want to just point out, a very simple solution, is to bring these to the floor and give us a vote on them. I'm happy to stay here tonight and vote, happy to come in early tomorrow and vote as well. It is certainly something within the power of this body to do that. So that's one simple solution. Next, I want to point out that the Pentagon is the one that picked this fight. They're the one that changed the policy. And in my opinion, this is an unlawful policy, that they are ignoring the Hyde Amendment, that they're using federal funds to aid and abet in abortions. As I dug a little deeper into this, I was shocked to find out that the Pentagon's policy allows more time off for an abortion than for a person who needs to go to attend to a family funeral or to a marriage. And I might add, of course, the military, I assume, is not paying for the travel of that soldier going back home to get married or to attend a family funeral. There's lots of arguments why we think this is right, but I think the ultimate argument is why Coach Tuberville and I are here, is that we believe in the sanctity of life, that we believe that life begins at conception. And I think if my colleagues across the aisle would sit and listen for a second, if you truly believe that life begins at conception, I don't see how you could support abortions, let alone using federal dollars to pay for these abortions. I remember my second year of medical school, and I was assuming I was going to be a family practice doctor. We'd been married for about a year and a half, had our first baby, and the second that little girl made her first cries, and I saw that bond between my daughter and my wife, and every time I delivered a baby since then, I've always just been amazed at that bond between a baby and a mom, that agape love that a mom shows a baby. But it was at that moment that my daughter was delivered that I decided that's what I wanted to do for a living. And as an obstetrician, a person who believes that life begins at conception, that's why this issue is so important to us. That's why this is such an important issue that we're willing to hold up these nominations. And I think what we're asking is a simple solution. Let's take these flag officers, these generals, let's vote on them. We can take these on. I think there's only 250 of them or so. I think we can take those on, and then let's do them. If not, we're asking the Pentagon to go back to the previous policy to stop their unlawful use of American taxpayer dollars, violating the Hyde Amendment for these abortions.
An objection?
Madam President.
Senator from Alabama.
Madam President, reserving the right to object. Last night I spoke on the phone with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. I also spoke with him last Thursday. Both conversations were very cordial. We had a good conversation, respectful, but they were very brief. There were absolutely no offer. There was no offer of a compromise. It's their way or the highway. Thus far, the Pentagon has done nothing but attack me. And I keep repeating the same claims over and over. Since I spoke with Secretary Austin on Thursday, a few things have changed. One is that the House of Representatives has now passed their annual defense bill. The bill contains an amendment that would explicitly repeal the memos which implemented the Pentagon's new abortion policy. It wasn't in the base text of the bill. It was added on the floor by the majority of the House members. The majority of the House of Representatives have spoken out in opposition to this policy. It was a bipartisan vote. Senator Bennet, Secretary Austin, and President Biden need to realize this. I am not alone. Our team is building and growing. 60% of the country is opposed to taxpayer funding for abortion. That includes Democrats, Republicans, and independents. 60%. The Pentagon's new abortion policy is even worse than that. It is a taxpayer-funded abortion that nobody, and I mean nobody, in the House or here voted for. And it gets worse. This morning, the Pentagon staff, who is in charge of putting this together, gave a briefing to the members of the Senate Armed Services Committee. To be honest with you, it was a complete debacle. I thought they would be prepared. The briefing confirmed a few things we know about this policy. First of all, there are virtually no restrictions at all on the use of this policy. None. The briefers confirmed that the policy could be used to facilitate a late-term abortion for enlisted members and their dependents. Pentagon officials confirmed that this policy would facilitate abortion up to the moment of birth, depending on the state. At the moment of birth. Late-term abortion is opposed. Madam President, late-term abortion is opposed by about 3/4 of the American people. To be clear, the DOD has the authority to perform abortions in cases of rape, incest, and life of the mother. That was passed on this floor in 1984. Now, what we're talking about with this new policy that no one in this bill voted on is taxpayer funding for elective late-term abortion. This is radical, it's extreme, and it's downright wrong. Third, the briefers essentially confirmed that the policy was not based on facts. It was based on an extreme political ideology. I asked the briefers for evidence that abortion improves readiness. They should have seen this coming before they walked in the building this morning at 9 o'clock. They knew they were going to be asked this. I've been asking this question for a year. Pentagon officials still have absolutely no evidence whatsoever that it impedes readiness. When the administration was touting this policy, they said it could lead up to 4,000 taxpayer-funded abortions a year. Now, let me explain this. When I got a briefing last year from the Pentagon, we asked them, how many abortions is this going to consist of? Well, now we're doing 24 a year. When this policy is put into place, RAND, their polling group out of the Pentagon, said it will affect probably around 4,000. Now, this came from the Pentagon. This wasn't made up by my team or anybody else in my party. This came directly from the Pentagon. Now, I want to say this, 4,000, and that's not including dependents. Not including dependents, so you're looking at a lot more. Now they're backtracking and accuse me of inflating that number. Well, that's fine. They've got a short memory. That argument cuts both ways. Democrats need to explain why 2,000 abortions, if that's all it's going to be, 2,000 abortions are necessary for a military of 2 million people. They can't explain it because it has nothing to do with readiness. We're talking about elective abortions. We already had an abortion policy for rape, incest, and health of the mom. This policy was in no way affected by the Alabama law or any other state law. It's got nothing to do with the Dobbs decision. This is a taxpayer-funded abortion that nobody, and I mean nobody, voted for in this building or the other end of the building. Democrats say my hold is unprecedented. Well, I will say this, their abortion policy is unprecedented. We are here to make the law, not the Pentagon. Anyone who calls themselves pro-life needs to stand up and be counted right now. That's my party included. Democrats, media machine is throwing the kitchen sink at this hold. Doesn't bother me. I've been called everything anyway. It just makes me that much stronger to hear people complain about this, knowing that deep down, somewhere there's a soft part in their heart for 4,000 to 5,000 unborn babies that will never breathe life on this earth. So the more Joe Biden attacks me, the more I'm convinced that I'm doing the right thing. Seems like my colleagues on the left will do anything to change the subject and distract from this issue at hand. Recently, even the White House attacked my football record. My wife did the same thing at times. It's absolutely ridiculous, though, how this thing has gotten out of hand. There's been very little conversation, very little dialogue, and that's what this place is supposed to be about. The only dialogue we've had is Senator Bennet and several other senators coming in, and we've discussed this in a UC. But the people that change and have an opportunity to make a difference in this could sit down and talk. So I hate that we have to do this, but we're going to stick with it. So let's stick with the facts. And after today's briefing, it's clear to me that the Pentagon doesn't have any facts. So for that reason, Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President.
Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm sorry that the senator from Alabama has objected tonight again. I think this is the 7th time that we've been out here having this conversation when I've been trying to move ahead the promotions of our Defense Department, and he has, in an unprecedented manner, opposed it. For 230 years, nobody in this chamber has done what the senator from Alabama is doing, put a hold on the military promotions of people in uniform, the flag officers of our Department of Defense that ordinarily come through here in a customary way to get approved by the Senate for obvious reasons, because we need them there for our national security. They have sacrificed their entire adult lives. They have sacrificed time with their family. They have sacrificed everything for this country. And now they've been promoted, and the senator, or they've been put on a list to be promoted, and the senator from Alabama has put a hold on them, which has never happened before in the history of the United States. For somebody who has put the Senate to a grinding halt month after month after month, he has picked an odd argument to defend his position, Madam President. He has said time and time again that what he's doing actually doesn't matter. What he's doing in the face of Democratic and Republican, not that it matters, because the Secretary of Defense, shouldn't think of themselves as a Democrat or Republican, but people that have served in Democratic and Republican administrations have said over and over again that he's compromising our national security, which is, of course, exactly the conclusion that anyone looking at this with common sense would believe. That our generals and our admirals actually make a difference, that the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff actually makes a difference. If that's not the case, we're in worse trouble than I thought. And if it is the case, if what he's saying is right, that it doesn't matter, it doesn't make any difference, then how can he claim to be acting on this incredibly important principle since it doesn't matter? As he says, these military positions are being fulfilled by acting officials, He says the generals, as I say, aren't important. The admirals aren't important. They can be filled by acting officials. We don't need a Marine Corps commandant, Madam President. In his mind, it doesn't matter. We don't need an Army Chief of Staff. We don't need a Chief of Naval Operations. We don't need a nominee for the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Madam President. All of those positions are up for promotion right now. Every single one is being blocked by the senator from Alabama and by people in this chamber that are supporting him on this unprecedented hold. By the way, I haven't talked about this in the 7 times that I've been out here, but I've heard from people about this since. So let me just mention the incredible unfairness of this hold to the families that are working, that are supporting and serving with and living with these members of the armed forces, many of whom have spent their entire career working to get to the point that they're in right now, to be promoted to a position of the most significant responsibility they've ever held. The decisions that have been made on the way here, to miss soccer games of their kids, to make a decision to accept a promotion that takes you to a foreign land distant from your family, distant from your community. The disruption in people's lives who now don't know where to put their kids in school because the senator from Alabama has put his blanket hold, which he says doesn't matter. These are people who wear the uniform of the United States. They're not politicians. Not that that matters either, but they are people that wear the uniform of this country, who have given their life and their career to this country. And he says holding up these promotions doesn't matter. That is, by the way, I'm not going to get distracted by this, and I'm not going to criticize his coaching career tonight or his football record, as he said. The senator from Kansas, I know, won't let me get away with that, so I'm not going to do it. But I would even say the senator of Kansas would have to admit, I hope that this is an odd position for a coach to take. That the coaches don't matter in our military. That our admirals and our generals, the people that rally the troops, don't matter. You know, this is like a little bit like saying the Denver Broncos didn't need Mike Shanahan to win 2 consecutive Super Bowls in 1997 and 1998. Or that the Denver Nuggets this year didn't need Michael Malone to win their first NBA championship. Or that to not criticize his record, but that the University of Alabama didn't need Nick Saban to win 8 SEC championships. Of course it matters. Leadership matters. Leadership matters probably more in the armed forces than it matters anywhere else. And that is the reason that we're here. He knows exactly what he's doing. He understands the damage that he's inflicted. And there's a reason why. He is the only senator in 230 years who has done this. What is it, Madam President? What is it that he wants to bring the country's attention to? What is he asking the country to pay attention to? He is saying that he's standing up for the sanctity of life. He said that tonight. He's claiming that in these policies, and that it's easy to describe these policies as, the woke Biden administration distorting the Defense Department to serve their, woke policy goals. And what he wants the American people to believe is that he's stopping the government from paying for abortions. And that's simply not what he's doing, because that's not what's happening. That's not what is at issue here. He says that the Dobbs decision doesn't have anything to do with what he's doing or with this case. And that's totally wrong. Last year, as everybody in America knows, the Supreme Court of the United States, for the first time since Reconstruction, stripped the American people of a fundamental freedom, a fundamental constitutional right. That has not happened in this country since Reconstruction, but it happened this year. It happened this year in the Dobbs case. It happened when Justice Alito, writing for the majority, said that if it wasn't a freedom in 1868, it's not a freedom today. And that was the most glorious, I would say inglorious, but he would say glorious expression of his judicial ideology of originalism that we have ever seen on the court. And it came after 50 years. It's worth going through this history because he blew it off so quickly. After 50 years of a concerted political effort to overturn a woman's right to choose in this country, to run elections based on taking that freedom away, that right away, to pack the courts with judges that would take that freedom away, to create a judicial ideology that barely existed. The ink was barely dry on the law review articles that Justice Scalia, then attorney Scalia, was writing when I was in law school, that was claiming that these originalists had a fundamental understanding of what the founders' perspective was and understanding was when they founded this country, when they wrote the Constitution. And now we've seen it manifest in this opinion by Justice Alito, where he says if it wasn't a freedom in 1868, it's not a freedom today. I don't want the Pages or anybody else that's here tonight to be fooled just because they use the word originalism. That is the most brilliant political name, the most brilliant political label that's ever been attached to any ideology, probably in the history of humankind, certainly in the history of our country, because it claims that they know what the founders actually wanted in this, when they founded this country, which of course is ridiculous on its face for a variety of reasons, not the least of which was the founders had fundamental disagreements with each other about all kinds of things. And anybody who has studied our constitutional history to any degree knows that, and knows that the Constitution was a product of compromise and consensus and agreement and disagreement. Some of the founders, I'm sad to say, owned slaves and fought very hard for the protection of human slavery in the United States of America. And their legacy will be with us to the end of our days because of what they did at the founding. There are other founders who fought, who were abolitionists, who said this is wrong. We should get rid of slavery. And the Constitution, just like our pieces of legislation around here, is littered with those kinds of compromises. Some of them are ones that are glorious, and some of them are ones that are inglorious. But I dwell on this, Mr. President, because it's important for people to understand this didn't come from nowhere. It's important to understand that we are at a moment when they have achieved their 50-year ambition, which is to create an originalist majority on the Supreme Court of the United States to reverse Roe versus Wade, among other things. But that is clearly the most important thing to them. And in a moment of, of maybe political distress, realizing that they had actually succeeded in their wildest dreams to achieve something that I can tell you, speaking for myself, Mr. President, in my advanced age, that when I was in law school would have been unimaginable, which is that in the United States we would reverse Roe versus Wade in the year 2023. That I would travel the streets of Colorado with my daughters, and we'd look up at the billboards advertising certain stuff in Colorado and realize that we lived in a country that was legalizing marijuana on the one hand and making abortion illegal at the same time. That is something we couldn't have imagined. That is something we would not have foreseen. But nobody, when I was in law school, would have believed that you could have gotten 5 justices of the Supreme Court to agree with the logic that if it's not a freedom in 1868, when women didn't even have the right to vote in this country, that it's not a freedom today. And it's as simple as that. It's as straightforward as that. And when that opinion was reached in Dobbs, then you started to hear people say, well, don't worry about it. That's just a states' rights issue. You don't need to worry about that. Laboratory of democracy. We're just going to see what, the states decide to do. Now, the first problem with that, of course, is that we're talking about a fundamental freedom. We're talking about a fundamental right. We're talking about, in my judgment, a civil right. So that's the first issue. That's something that shouldn't be decided state by state by state. But it turned out that they actually meant what they said. This wasn't just an experiment in democracy. This was an attempt to ban abortion in the United States of America. Since Dobbs was decided, 21 states, Mr. President, have banned abortion or restricted access. Last week, Iowa passed a 6-week abortion ban. Most women don't even know they're pregnant at 6 weeks. The leading candidate for president on their side of the aisle, who's not named Donald Trump, signed an abortion ban in his state, the state of Florida, that 65% of Floridians oppose, that bans abortion at 6 weeks. And he did it at 11 o'clock at night. Why do you think he did that at 11 o'clock at night? Maybe because he knew what seemed like the thing to do on right-wing radio was going to be a lot less popular with the voters in Florida. And I would say the voters across the United States of America who are deeply concerned about protecting this civil right, who are deeply concerned about protecting freedom and a woman's right to choose, and all the implications for equality that exist, that come to the fore when you're facing questions like this. And now those are the questions that we're facing right now. In the wake of the Defense Department in good faith, trying to grapple with the change in the law brought about by the majority of the Supreme Court stripping away this fundamental freedom and stripping away this fundamental right. Mr. President, you know, there was a time when women serving in our military would have some assurance that they were going to have minimal access to reproductive health care no matter where they served. That was the law of the land before Dobbs. That is what Roe versus Wade said. But now they don't have that minimal access. And the Department of Defense, in the wake of the decision in Dobbs, not a decision I assume they would have wanted, but is trying to grapple with that in ways that make sense for the men and women who serve in our military. And they're basically trying to say, let us treat women the same as everybody else who's serving in the military. And in response to Dobbs, the Pentagon issued 3 policies. Let me tell you something. We are going to have a debate in this country about what Dobbs means when it comes to access to a woman's right to choose. And the consensus that exists around here for a long time has been upset by that. And we're going to have a debate about that. I'm sure about that. But I just want to say it is absolutely false that the Defense Department has created a situation where they are suggesting that they're funding taxpayer abortions. That's what the senator from Alabama says. I hope that people that are supporting him on this floor know that's false. They know that's not true. That is not what the Defense Department did. The Defense Department has not violated the Hyde Amendment. The Defense Department, faced with this decision in Dobbs, did 3 things. They said, if you need reproductive health care or if you need an abortion, we will pay for your travel to go from a state like Alabama, where you can get jailed, I guess, up to 99 years if you're a doctor that performs an abortion, to a state like Colorado that has enshrined Roe versus Wade, that will pay your way. That's not special treatment. That is the treatment that everybody gets for a medical service that's not provided near their base. Second thing they said was they were going to allow paid leave while you were getting your reproductive health care, just like everybody else who's going to get a medical procedure gets. And we're going to give you a little bit of additional time on this, what can be a very difficult subject for the reasons everybody here knows, to talk to your commanding officer and inform them that you're pregnant. That's it. That is it. That is it. It's not more than that. And so what I would ask everybody in this chamber, whether you are pro-life or whether you are pro-choice or something else, or everybody across America who is suffering now because we're not able to promote the flag officers in the U.S. military, what I would ask you to consider, please, is what Senator Tuberville will win if he wins. What will Senator Tuberville win if he wins? He will assure that women are going to be treated worse than men in the Department of Defense. He will assure that women will be treated differently, unequally, and unfairly. Because unlike anyone else who needs a medical procedure, they will have to pay for their own travel out of let's just say, Alabama or other states that have banned abortion to be able to access an abortion. Unlike everybody else, they will have to take unpaid leave while they're trying to undergo that medical procedure, or a medical procedure that could lead to an abortion. I don't think most people in this country that are pro-life would think that women should be treated differently in that respect, discriminated against. I think they would take the view that if you are serving in the United States Armed Forces and you are serving in a state that has banned abortion, and you are pregnant and you have decided, you have made a judgment on your own or with your family or with your doctor that the right answer for you and for your family is to go to another state and have an abortion, I think most people would say that you ought to have the right to do that you shouldn't be discriminated against if that's your judgment. That doesn't mean you're pro-choice or pro-life. It means that people can make that determination and that people shouldn't be discriminated against. I have to say, Mr. President, it is almost as if he's punishing them for the rule that the Department of Defense has promulgated. You know, and that he wants to try to make this case of the Biden administration overreaching, distorting the Department of Defense, bending DOD to its will, infusing the Department of Defense with some sort of woke strategy. I think it's really important for the American people to understand what's at stake here. This is not a game. This is not a game when you're holding up every promotion of every single flag officer at DOD. This is not a game when all you're talking about is whether we're going to have a country that discriminates against people or whether people are going to be treated equally. This isn't a game when the question is, are you going to have the ability to pay, to have your leave paid for, or your travel paid for, to have a little extra time to talk to your commanding officer about the decision that you're going to have to face. Why in the world would we want to make life more difficult for people who are in that condition or circumstance? Why are we blaming them for a rule that they had nothing to do with writing and that the DOD had the ability to promulgate? The Department of Justice has made that clear. It defies common sense. It defies common sense. And tonight we heard him say, you know, that he's here because he's trying to defend the sanctity of life. That's what he said. And I've said out here, and I will say again, that I believe that people in this country have strong differences of opinion when it comes to a woman's right to choose and when it comes to abortion. And I think it's really important that people respect that. The presiding officer and I actually have had this conversation over the years about that, and I believe it. I think that people could have very different moral points of view here. I think people can have very different religious points of view about this. I have concluded for myself that I think this is a decision that is much better left, partly because it is such a difficult decision. It is a much better decision to be left to a woman herself, consulting with whomever she wants to consult with, her doctor or family, than it is for Michael Bennet to impose myself on that decision, or for Senator Tuberville to impose himself on that decision. I mean, tonight we heard him say that he thinks that DOD, that somehow this money could be used to pay for late abortions in this country. And who wouldn't be for stopping late abortions in America? Everybody would want to stop late abortions, I would think. If you studied the matter, if you asked the question, what is a late abortion in America, what does happen, what you discover is, Mr. President, not surprisingly, that 1% of abortions in America, or less than 1%, are late abortions in America. And there are situations where women, moms, mostly moms, have made the decision to, I say it's because it's going to be moms and dads, but often, mostly mom, made a decision to have a child, to pick a name, to pick out the furniture for a bedroom, and then something has gone terribly wrong, something nobody in this chamber would ever wish on anybody they knew. And sometimes those are circumstances where, against all expectations, against all promise, against all hope, against all joy, somebody has to make a decision to have a late-term abortion. Is that really the moment that we want Senator Tuberville helping make that decision? Is that really when we want the federal government helping make that decision? I don't think so. But I think we shouldn't be surprised that we're here with this extreme measure that he's taken in the Senate, a reflection of what is an extreme ideology. He's called abortion infanticide. He's called abortion this generation's Holocaust. He won't be satisfied until he subjects women in his state to the draconian measures that Alabama has legislated. No exceptions for rape or incest in Alabama. If you're a doctor and you perform an abortion, you can go to jail for up to 99 years in Alabama. Just today, Mr. President, we found out that the Alabama Attorney General, like the Attorney General from Mississippi, I think it was, wants to record information and is demanding that information be supplied to the government on women who have traveled out of state to seek abortion services. That's a pretty dystopian view of where we are as a country. I don't understand how you could say you're on the side of freedom and be trying to hunt the information down for American citizens that are making a decision that's in their interest or the interest of their family. To collect information on a lawful medical procedure, to try to prevent women from traveling across state lines in this country, this democracy, this republic. How do you say that you're on the side of freedom when you refuse to allow women to have the same opportunity to travel for medical procedures as men, unless you think that somehow women aren't entitled to the same freedoms as men? How do you make the case, I don't know, that you stand for freedom? You might stand for something else, but to stand for freedom when you say that you're in a better position as an elected politician from a state to make judgments about a woman's pregnancy than she is? This is a freedom to discriminate, Mr. President. This is a freedom to oppress people. We're in a tough place tonight because of what the senator from Alabama has done. I acknowledge that his state is really different from mine. Colorado really values freedom, and Colorado really values privacy. By the way, I'm sure the people of Alabama do too. I can't prove it here tonight, but I'll bet you there are a lot of people in Alabama who think it's wrong to be holding up these flag officers, and who, if they knew that this really, was about paying, for example, for paid leave, not taxpayer-funded abortions, which is what we heard again tonight, which isn't true, that they'd say, man, this doesn't sound like the right battle that we're taking. It's like the 65% of people in Florida who are saying, what? Our governor signed a bill at 11 o'clock at night to create a 6-week abortion ban in our state? When there are women in Florida all the time who have, don't even know that they're pregnant at that time. Colorado's taken a different view. We're a libertarian state in some respects, a libertarian state, a Western state. We believe a decision about a woman's health belongs between a woman and her doctor and her family if she chooses to involve them. We were the first state in America to decriminalize abortion before Roe versus Wade was even decided. We were the first state, Colorado, to codify a right to choose after Dobbs. And that's a totally different view of the world than Alabama has, and I accept that. But the reason why we're here is we got to figure out what to do in a post-Dobbs world where that minimum threshold, that constitutional freedom on which so many generations of Americans, especially American women, but Americans have relied, and has been stripped away. And in my opinion, in the meantime, we ought to be willing to say that this is a decision that should be left to women to make this decision in their interest and for themselves. It's not my job or the senator from Alabama's job to substitute his position, his decision, to effectively say that we're going to reward your service, your willingness to serve in the Department of Defense when you've been sent through no fault of your own or decision of your own to a place like Alabama that's banned abortion in this country. We're going to not only allow you to make that decision, but we're going to say you got to pay your own way out of here. That unlike any other person, you can't take paid leave. I think that's an extreme position, Mr. President, and I think it is an absurd position to believe that we're not hurting our national defense by not confirming these generals and these admirals and these other people that are up for promotion. That it doesn't somehow degrade our military readiness when it obviously does. And every single person in this chamber knows that it does. At a time when Putin is in Ukraine and China is saber-rattling in the Pacific, this is the last thing we need to do. There is a reason why, Mr. President, our friends in Ukraine are working so hard to try to take out the leadership in Putin's army, for God's sake. Because it matters who's in command. As a matter of your national defense, as a matter of your national security, as a matter of your willingness or your ability to be able to effectively fight. So I'm at the end tonight, Mr. President. I apologize to the floor staff once again for keeping us here as late as I have. I apologize to the young pages that are here in particular, and not just for that fact, but because we've they are coming of age at a moment in American history when we are coughing up fundamental rights instead of extending those rights to people. But that's what this battle has to be about. That's what this battle is about. It's why it's so important that when something like this happens, that we call it out. And that even people that are natural allies or otherwise would be natural allies of a particular political position might in this instance say, man, that tactic is really self-defeating. Or might in this instance say, please at least tell the American people candidly what it is you're doing. And I think the American people, if they understood that, would say we should do our job and approve these nominations. I think the American people in the years ahead and the decades ahead are going to fix the decision that the Dobbs Court just did. There's no doubt in my mind that the American people are not going to stand for Justice Alito's America, where if it wasn't a freedom in 1868, it's not a freedom today. We've come too far for that to be our point of view. We owe too much to this next generation of Americans and even the generation that's coming after them, believe it or not, for that to be our point of view. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Baldwin.